Alright everybody, welcome back to another Ask a Dev Unreal Engine tutorial. We are working our way through our UI series as part of our Visual Scripting Fundamentals courses. If you recall, we left off with our UI layout section, and we're trying to get to the point where we can actually get into some of the fun things like buttons and scroll wheels, all that scroll widgets and all those kinds of things. But we do need to do a couple more things before we get there. We need to talk about input modes, mouse cursors, UI garbage collection, a couple other things. That's what we're going to be doing today. My name's Kevin. Thanks for watching the video and being part of this community. As always, if you like what we're doing, help spread the word. You know how this works. Also, don't forget, a huge portion of our videos are actually in the live section because we do a lot of our tutorials live. So feel free to check those out. With that, let's hop back into our UI layout and tutorial, and we'll start from there. Alright, so here we are inside Unreal Engine, and if you recall, where we left off was when we press play, we'd run around, we have our UI, our layout is set up. What we're going to do first is we're going to separate this, because I want to have a HUD, and I want to have a menu that pops up with items that we want to try to click, because we're trying to get to the point where we can click buttons. So let's go ahead and separate these two. I'm going to just simply duplicate my HUD. I'm going to call this Debug UI, or debug menu. Okay, and what I'm going to do in my debug menu is I'm going to delete the HUD portion of it. We'll compile and save that, and then what I'll do in my HUD is I will delete the debug menu, which is this one. So now there are two separate UIs. That way we have something to work with for when we play. And you'll notice now when we play, we only have our HUD, which could be our health bar, our abilities, etc. Now what we need to do is we need to add back the ability to show our debug menu. So let's go ahead and do that in our third person character. So the whole idea here is we're trying to get to the point where we can click on some buttons, but we need to get into some of our input modes first, and you'll see why here in a second. So let's do this. We could use enhanced input, but just for speed, I'm just going to use key press, and I'm going to choose, I think, the M key, for example. So now, what we're going to do when you press the M key is we're going to create a widget. And the widget we're going to create is the debug menu that we just created. Okay? And after we're done with that, we're going to add that to the UI by adding it to the viewport. So to get that, we need to get the controller. And what we can do with the local player controller, let me just go ahead and put a get in here just to make this easier. There's only one of us, there's only one character in here, so we can get our player character controller. In this particular case, so this will work because index 0 is our player. And what we're going to do with this is we're going to add this to the viewport, and that should pop our UI up onto the viewport. When we press the M key, we can test it very quickly. Press M and it shows up. Now there's no way to get rid of it. All right, well, let's go ahead and make some changes to this. So let's promote this to a variable, and I want to show you a couple things that are going to happen as we proceed here. So we're going to add that to the viewport, and this is going to be our debug menu. And then what we're going to do is when we release the M key, we could just remove this from parent. There's no destroy on the UI, so we basically just remove this from parent, and now when we release the M key, the UI will disappear. So here we go. Press the M, let go, and it goes away. Now, remember, the whole point was we want to be able to click on buttons and things like that. Well, there's some issues if we're holding the M key and clicking things, because what'll happen is it'll change the focus and stuff. So what we actually want to do, and also you'll notice, and I'm going to actually, let me demonstrate that real quick by adding a button real quick. So I'm going to add a button to our layout. And this button is going to be just above the image, so it's the first thing here. If I go to press play, you'll notice I have my button. If I'm running, and I can no longer click that button, first off, and there's no way for me to click the button. I can't click the button for the menus, and I can't click the button in the heads up display, neither one. And this is where we get into your input mode. Your input mode is going to determine whether or not you can click on UI at the same time or not. And you'll notice there's actually three general settings of input modes we can have. We can have game only, which is basically what we have right now. So the only thing you see is the game. All the inputs are basically everything you would use for the game. You're probably used to this in a first-person shooter or a third-person shooter or slasher, whichever one it is. Then we have input mode and UI. Those would be things where you want the UI to be active while you're still doing it. Maybe those are DCG games or things like that. And then finally, there is just the UI only mode. Now, interestingly enough, Unreal says specifically in their docs, what does it say? It says, this one is an edge case used when you only want to allow the UI navigation. This completely disables all game controls and UI consumes all input, so you use this node sparingly. Let's go into what that means here in a second, and I'll show you what's going on. So first off, in order to be able to click something while we are playing the game, we need to change our input mode with our widgets. So let's go back here, and here's it in our viewport. After we add the viewport, I am going to set the input mode to, you'll notice the three that I called out. We have game and UI, game mode only, and input mode UI only. Let's go to game and UI, and I'm going to go ahead and plug this in. We could set the focus for a widget to be our new debug menu if we wanted to. And the rest of the stuff we'll just kind of leave. Now, when we're done, what we need to do is we need to set our input mode back to whatever we want for the game that we're using. So in this particular case, I'm going to set my input mode back to game only. And the reason that we'll do this is because anything you're doing in your UI could potentially take over your key bindings and things like that, depending on how you set it up. And we'll get into that in a second. All right, so now when we go to press play, we have our HUD. I can't click on it. If I press M to bring up the UI, I can now, you can see I'm highlighting the buttons on the right, and I'm highlighting the button in the middle, but I can't actually see my mouse. So the other thing is, if I click on it, you'll notice that UI disappears. Okay, and that's because, there's a couple things that are conflicting here. What's happening is I'm pressing the M key. I have not released it, but when I click, it takes the focus away from the M key, so the UI disappears anyways. So we're going to switch this UI to be a toggle, and I'm going to show you a couple other things. I do want to double check to see if this hide cursor during capture actually changes anything real quick. So let's just see. It does not. So, wrong button. So, first off, one thing at a time. Let's set this back to the default. What we're going to do is I want to show the cursor. I believe it's set show mouse cursor. So this is going to make it a whole lot easier for you to visualize where your mouse is during these events. So what this is going to do, when we check this box, we'll go ahead and save these things so that you can see them. Now when we bring up our widget, you'll notice I have my mouse. Okay, so now I can actually see where I'm hovering and so on. I still have the same problem where when I go to click, it disappears and my mouse still stays up. So I do need to, the same way that I'm setting the game mode back to game only, I also want to set my mouse back as well. So let's just do this. We'll set our mouse back to here. But like I said, I want to make this a toggle because maybe I want to click more than one button at a time. So let's uncheck this box. All right, that will get rid of our cursor. Now, how do we make this a toggle? Well, first we need to get rid of this on released. And there's a couple of things I'm going to show you as far as this toggle. We have our input game mode as UI. So first thing we want to check. Let's go ahead and say, if this is valid, and actually let me go ahead and pop our font size for you all, make it a little bit easier for you all to read. Okay, so let's go ahead and check to see if it is valid. So we'll type in valid, and if it is valid, then what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of it, we're going to remove it from parent. So I'm going to flop these in a second. And if it's not valid, then what we're going to do is we are going to take the UI and create it because we need it. Okay, so here we go. So if it's not valid, that means we need to create it and build it. Now I want to show you a couple of things about this. I'm just connecting everything up. I missed the connection. Okay, so now what's going to happen is when we press M, if debug menu is valid, then we're going to remove it from the parent, and if it's not, we're going to add it to the viewport. Okay, so let's see what happens here. Now when we press play, if I press M and I let go, it's fine, it stays, that's what we want. So now we can click all of our buttons, everything's working, and now if I press M again, it disappears. Great. However, if I press M again, it does not come back. Why is that? The reason it doesn't come back, and this is important to understand, is when you remove it from the parent, it might not actually get destroyed. So, as an example, let's go ahead and do this. Let's go ahead and say if it is not valid, we're adding it to the viewport, but if it is valid, what we need to do is we need to see, we actually need to add it to the viewport. So let's see here, hold on a second. If it is valid, we're removing it. That's what we did. And if it's not valid, we're creating the widget, etc. So what's happening is it has not actually been destroyed yet, and we don't have a way to destroy it. So what we actually want to do is let's use another bit of information on this, and let's do visibility. So we'll get the visibility of the widget. That's not the one I want. I want to get, maybe it's hidden. Get visible. Is visible. This is what I want. Is visible. Okay. So if the widget is visible, then we are going to do all of our stuff. Okay. So we're going to use this as our trigger. So if the widget is visible, we know that we want to basically remove it from the parent. And if it's not visible, we know we want to create it. All right, so we're going to create it. Now, if it's not visible and our debug menu, so this is going to change this condition for us. So if it's not visible, we're going to create it. If it is visible, then this is valid check we want to change, because if it is valid, then what we want to do is we want to remove it from parent, and let's set the visibility of this menu as well. Set visibility to be hidden. Okay, so if it is visible, we are going to check to see if it's valid. It should be valid, so we're probably gonna, let's just take this out for right now. All right, so if it is visible, then we're going to remove it from the parent, we're going to set the input mode back, and we're going to set its visibility to hidden. If it is not visible, we're going to create our widget and add it to the viewport. Now this is going to create a little bit of a problem for us, and this is where I want to be clear that this remove parent does not destroy it. So let me show you something. Let me just put in here a print string, and we're going to print the display name of our widget. I want you to notice as we play now, when we bring up our widget, you'll notice that that's widget debug menu C0. We get rid of it. Debug menu C1. Every time I'm showing and hiding this, I'm creating a new widget. So I'm already at widget 6. There's widget 8, and so on. So we have to be a little bit smarter about this. So what we need to do is, if we already have the widget and it's valid, in other words, it wasn't destroyed by the system, we actually need to do this a little differently. So if debug menu is not valid, then we're going to create it like we normally do. Okay? If it is valid, then all we are going to do is we are going to add it to the viewport and set the visibility. So we're going to skip all this stuff. We're not going to recreate our widget. That way we're not creating a whole bunch of these sitting in memory every time we press the M key. And then just for double checking, let's go ahead and actually we don't even need that. We can just do a print string right here again after this to make sure that we're not creating multiples. Let's get the display name, and print that for posterity, if you will. And then what we'll do is we'll go ahead and press play. So now when we press the M key, we got widget menu C0. When we press the M key again, it goes away. When we press the M key again, widget C0 still again. So now we are reusing our widget. And this is important because it turns out there's no way for us to definitively destroy a widget. When we remove it from parent, it may or may not get garbage collected. That's the process that Unreal uses to go through and destroy things and get rid of them. And so it is possible that it may or may not be valid. So we need to, if we really, really want to be diligent about this, we want to make sure that we have this set up so that we're not potentially creating a new menu when we don't need to. Okay, so at this point, what we have is we have our system set up. So we have our debug menu being displayed, whether or not, basically by toggling on and off. And what's cool about this is now when we play, when we press M, we can press these keys and so on. Now, here's the thing. Our game is still running. I'm still able to run around because currently I am in game and UI. So what's happening is if the UI doesn't capture the key, it sends the key through to the game. So WASD still works. In this particular case, this is a third-person shooter. If we switch our input mode, okay, instead of using set input mode to game and UI, let's set our input mode to just UI and look at the difference. So we'll do UI only. And now when we play, and this gets fun, because when we play, what's going to happen is when I bring up the UI, I can no longer WASD. I know you can't see me, but hopefully you can hear me clicking the WASD. So that's not working. And I can still click and everything like that. But that also means that my M key no longer works. I have no way to get rid of the UI because when I switch to UI only, all of the key bindings that are set up for the game, which includes the key to show and hide our UI widget, no longer works. So there's no way for me to get rid of this widget. So I'm going to show you a couple things to consider that you might use in that particular case. Okay, a couple things. So that's UI mode only. All right, this is game mode only. If we could get it to go away, it would work. So for example, we could put a close button on the UI, and if you click close, it would close itself, and then that would restore game input, etc. But we're not going to do that. Here's what we're going to do. We are going to, in our debug menu, this is actually something that is, it's not super obvious, but what you can do inside of functions that are overridable, you can override the key down when this widget has the focus. All right, so in here, what we can do is we can make up our own key bindings for while this widget is in focus. Now, this is something that, you know, I have not even used a ton, but it's a great way, and it's a little quirky, but it's a great way to at least have this as an option so that when your widget, especially if you have like a full screen widget or whatever, this will work really, really well. So the way this works is you basically get the key event and you're going to get the key that's pressed. Okay, in this particular case, let's use the key. Actually, let's do a couple things here just to show you how this works. Let's see if this is equal to the key we're going to use is the W key. All right, and if it is, I want to show you what happens and what I mean by the UI handles this. If it's the W key, I am going to print a string. Let's print the string WASD takeover. W takeover. Okay? And we are going to return, what are we going to return? We're going to return that this has been handled. If I right click and type handled, I can choose handled or I can choose unhandled. So if it doesn't, I'm going to return unhandled. So let's go ahead and do that. Unhandled. All right, so what's going to happen is when we come into, if our widget has the focus, if we press the W key, when we press W, we're going to print widget takeover instead of our character running forward. Now, in order for this experiment to work, I do need to switch back to input UI and game just so that this all works. And I'm going to switch back to where we were going with this in the first place. So here we are, WASD works, my character can run forward. Okay, if I press M, I can still run forward. However, if I mouse over this widget and click on a button, I can no longer run forward. And when I press W, notice it prints W takeover in the top left. But I still can use ASD. So I can still go right, left, backwards, and so on. I just can't go forward until I click off of it. Once I click off of it and this widget no longer has the focus, I'm able to use all my WASD keys again. So I can technically use and capture different keys for my UI versus my game mode. So what that means is, if we switch this back to input UI only, what we could do for our debug menu is, if this was the Q key, for example, we could say close the UI. How are we going to do that? Let's go ahead back in our third person character. Let me compile and save this just in case we get one of those fun restarts opportunities. I'm going to add a custom event here, for example. This is just a way to do it. I'm going to call this event close debug, for example. All right, and what we're going to do if we call this event is we are going to simply come in here and we're going to remove from parent and reset our game mode. Okay, and then in our debug menu, what we can do is we can get the controller. So we can get the player controller, and then from there we can cast that to, or we can get the pawn. So we get the controlled pawn, let's cast that to third person. And I'm not worried about the cost of these casts or anything. This is only happening if you actually press the M key and bring up the widget. I do want to see if I can get the controlled pawn right here. Let me see if I can get the pawn without getting the get the player pawn. Ooh, I can. Okay, so I can skip all that. There we go. So let's just cast that to a third person character. If that succeeds, then as a third person character, I can call our close debug UI if we press the Q key. So if we, hold on a second. So we're going to come in here. If it's the Q key and it's true, we are going to go through here. We're going to continue, we're going to close, and then we will return handled. All right, let's clean this up a little bit. Okay, now, if for some reason our controller is not a third person character, we want to return unhandled. All right, so what this does though is this now allows us to use a key with our UI so that if we are in UI mode only, there's a way for me to close it in addition to creating my own close button, for example, within the UI. So if we compile and save this, let me just double check that we are UI only. We are UI only. So what should happen is when we play, we can WASD. When I press the M key, my UI shows up. I cannot WASD, I'm trying. I can click on things, but I can't WASD. But if I press the Q key, that did not work. Let's figure out what we did wrong. Let's see here. Debug menu. Let's see if we're even hitting our debug close real quick. Oh, I know why. It does work. We'll go leap of faith. Because remember what I said. You had to bring up our UI. This has to have focus in order for the keys to work properly, those key bindings for that UI. So now if I press Q, it goes away and we go back. I forgot about the focus thing. So that allows us to create a key binding within a UI. So even if you are using UI only mode, you can actually, there is a way for you to close that UI with a key binding in addition to, like I said, a close button. All right, so for the most part, we've covered a lot about our input modes. I am going to switch back to our default game and UI mode. And our Q key will still work, as well as our M key now. So if we bring up our M key, if this one has focus, I can press Q. If we bring it back, let's see here. Let me make sure our toggle's still working. There we go. Oh, we broke something with our toggle. Let's see here. What did we break? The second time through. Let's double check this. Let's debug this real quick. All right, so if I press M, that's hitting our breakpoint. That's fine. If I press M again, okay, what's going to happen is it's going to come through here. It's going to remove it from the parent. It's going to set game only. It's going to hide the mouse cursor and show hidden. Great. So now if I press M again, it comes in here. It's false. It is valid. So we're adding it to the viewport. We're setting and we're showing our cursor. Interesting. Oh, we forgot to show the visibility. Okay, so we forgot one step. That is why debugging is awesome. If you don't know how to debug blueprints, I'll put a link in the description down below. I have a whole tutorial on how to do debugging, but you can see here we're setting our visibility. One of the things that we want to do with our menu after the fact is we do need to set it back to visible as well. So let's set it to visible, not collapsed, visible. All right, now we can retest that. Here we go. Press the M key. All right, so everything is working as expected. All right, so we've covered the 3 different input modes. We've talked about key bindings. We've talked about a bunch of different things. One last thing that I want to cover for you all is pausing your game. What do I mean by that? I'm going to take an item. Let me see if I have sparklers in here. Particle. Okay, so let's just drag sparks in. The reason I'm dragging sparks in is because when we press play, if I wanted this to be, let's say it was a debug menu, let's say it was a loadout screen, something like that. The point I want to make here is if I press the M key, my UI is up, but my game is still playing. So if there were enemies in the level when I press this button, they'll still be able to come up and beat on me. Okay, that may not be what you want. You may want to pause your game. So what you can do as part of this toggle, if you want to, is after you add this to the screen, we can do pause. And I think we do need, is it off of here? Nope. Let's just try it off of here. Okay, set game paused. Okay, and all we're going to do is check that button. And then when we remove it, we're going to do the exact opposite. So when we remove our widget, whether it be a loadout screen or whatever, we will unpause the game. So now the sparklers are running. If we pause the game, you'll notice they stop. So our game is completely paused at this point. That also means though that I cannot WASD anymore. So you're going to have to, it's really going to depend on what it is that you are trying to build or how your UIs are supposed to work. But hopefully we're giving you all the little pieces and the understandings to each of the little pieces and the modes so that when you need to, you can go ahead and do that. So interestingly enough, when the game is paused, this is also another good thing to note. If the game is paused, you cannot press M anymore. WASD doesn't work, it's the same issue. So in that particular case, as long as my widget has focus, I can press the Q key to get out. So something to be aware of. All right, so that wraps up this video on game modes widget key bindings, as well as pause and a couple things to consider about garbage collection for your UIs so that you're not actually creating a whole bunch of extra widgets that you don't even know about. The goal of this was to give you at least the building blocks that you might need to go ahead and set up your particular UI setup now that you kind of understand some of the nuances of how all this stuff works. And with that, what that means is in our next UI tutorial, we're going to be able to start talking about cool things like buttons and how do we connect them and what are the bound events are and hover abilities and all those kinds of stuff. So as always, thanks for taking time to check out this video. Thanks for being part of this community. And again, if you dig what we're doing, you can support us on Patreon by spreading the word or just keep on watching videos. Thanks for watching. Catch you all in the next one. Later.